It's not the death sentence itself, it's the waiting for it to happen because you don't know what day will be your last day. On the night of the 10th of April, my commander came to me and said I had 10 minutes to make a decision. He gave us the choice of we can either try and go out in the vehicles to make a last-ditch attempt to try and break out, or we can go on foot to try and break out on foot and walk 145 kilometers to friendly lines, or we can remain here and surrender officially to Russian forces. Initially, I chose the surrender because, from my experience in Syria, I've seen how breakouts from encirclements happen. In Syria, we had multiple times where ISIS would try to break out and they just got decimated by artillery and aviation. So I knew that was pretty much suicide if we did go on it. I was pretty enthusiastic for trying to walk out. However, I asked my commander how many of us are going, and he said probably more than 700 people will be trying to break out on foot. At that point, I realized, with the amount of people that would be trying to get out of such a small area, it would probably be pretty slim that we would actually be successful. And so I chose to surrender officially because at least that time, I wouldn't be in the heat of the moment or the adrenaline if someone captures me. When that time did come to go to the surrender point and it was clarified and settled, the feeling was pretty depressive. I remember I walked into the bunker with everyone else who was surrendering, and I saw one of the officers from the other companies that was sat in there who I knew. And I remember sitting down with him, and everyone was pretty quiet, but there was still a bit of humor. The officer I was speaking to, he was drinking some champagne, and I remember asking him for some champagne because I thought, we're going into captivity. This is my last chance to have a free drink at freedom. And we we didn't touch on it too much, but everyone knew what was coming next. So it was pretty gloomy, but there was some sort of sense that we would get through this. And I remember as well at that point, because I knew I'm a foreigner, I'm going to be treated differently to the Ukrainians. I'm going to be separated, and at that moment in time, I truly believed that I would be shot on sight. After the initial beat around, it stopped, and then we were put back into the stress positions. We didn't have any access to food or water. We were given a bucket to piss in, and we went then spent the night in that warehouse just in a stress position against the wall, and we weren't allowed to move from it. The next day, intelligence came and they picked out random people who might be of interest to them. Eventually, they picked me out. They took me to the back of a Russian Tiger armored personnel carrier, and I told them I was a Ukrainian Marine. I gave them my Ukrainian military documents. I gave them my passport. And they finished with me. They gave me back my passport, but they kept my military ID. They put me into the stress position again, and then they would come and ask me some questions, very basic stuff about who I was, which unit I was with. Initially, they said to me that I was a sniper because I had a tattoo, Happy Days, on my left arm. And my friend Sean, who was also in Mariupol, he also had a tattoo, and I hadn't seen Sean for at least 2 months before this. So at this point, I initially thought that maybe Sean was killed because they said to me that they had found him dead. And I started to worry that maybe now they think I'm a sniper, and I knew about the reputation in the military world when it comes to snipers. And I tried to explain to them that I'm not a sniper, I'm in mortars. Luckily, they had someone that was from my unit, and they brought him to us, and they said if this person doesn't say what you've just said, you're going to be punished. Luckily, the person that they brought to us, I knew him from my unit, and he knew me, and he repeated everything that I had already said, so that avoided any punishment that they threatened with me. They put me back into the warehouse. At this point, it was filled with about 800 to 700 Ukrainians who had all surrendered or been captured. And then 10 minutes later, my name was called and I was taken out and placed into handcuffs and then led into the back of an SUV. And I remember getting into the SUV and seeing on the license plate, it said Donetsk People's Republic. So I knew I wouldn't be going to Russia. I'm most likely going to Donetsk. As we got in and they closed the door on me, we were driving out of the compound and they turned to me and said, like, now you're going to be taken to be shot. I didn't respond to it. I pretended that I didn't understand and just processed in my head that this is it, this is how I die. I was thinking about my family and my fiance, and just processing that this is probably like the last few moments that I will have like to think about it. Thankfully, after about an hour's like driving, I realized to myself that I'm obviously not being taken to be shot, because you wouldn't take someone on an hour's drive to just shoot them. So I realized we were being taken to the next stage of captivity. At this point, I'd been singled out. So I knew I was going to be going somewhere where violence is going to be pretty common. And I was trying to prepare myself mentally for the next phase of captivity, which I knew was coming, which was going to be beatings and interrogations. We drove for another hour and then we arrived in the city of Donetsk. I was unloaded from the back of the SUV. Just in front of me stood a man in a blue uniform. He said something to me in Russian. I didn't understand what he said, maybe because he was drunk or his accent was just too thick to understand. And I remember asking him in Russian, like, to politely repeat what he said. As soon as I said that, he started beating me with the police baton. I fell to the floor and he continued to beat me a few more moments before dragging me into a building and then put me into an empty room with two other Ukrainians who had bags on their heads stood against the wall. In this room, I remember seeing on the floor there was bits of like discarded like uniforms and stuff, so I knew that this room is what I think it is. He then continued to beat me for 2 hours, maybe an hour and a half, and in between like moments of where he would beat me, he would ask me a question, a very basic question of like, which unit am I? I'd tell him I'm Ukrainian Marine, and then he would beat me, and then he would ask me about my position and rank and continue to beat me. And at one point he told me to take my clothes off and look at my tattoos. He saw my Ukrainian trident tattoo. As soon as he saw that, he started beating me again for that, and every tattoo that he saw, he beat me for it. He then stopped to take a rest, and at this point, I'm in complete fear for my life. But I was still somewhat, like, I still had some sort of grasp of, like, eventually it's going to end. And it was at the point when he took a rest, he was, like, smoking a cigarette, and he basically said to me, like, do you want a quick death or do you want a beautiful death? And obviously I said a quick death, and then he said, no, you're going to have a beautiful death. And then just at that moment, he also like pointed to my shoulder and he says, did you see what I did to you? And I was completely oblivious to my injuries, and I looked over onto my shoulder and saw I had been stabbed. As soon as I saw the stab wound, that's when my mental wall like broke down, because I expected to be beaten and whatnot, but I never expected to be stabbed, and I seriously believed at that moment was going to be the moment that I would be killed.
Do you have a scar there? Would you mind showing us?
Yeah.
Man, what's the pain like when that happens?
Because I was being beaten, I didn't feel it, so I wasn't aware that I'd been stabbed. Because the adrenaline was just keeping me alive, basically, from just the beating. So I never felt it initially. But when I saw it and I saw the wound of it, I remember thinking to myself, like, I didn't even feel it, like what the hell? And I was in total fear at that point, because I started thinking back to like the ISIS videos or something else to similar in that regard, and I was just expecting them at any moment to just take the knife and like stab me in the neck, which they did do a few times, like threatening, like they took the knife and they held it against my neck. And then the other thing that I was scared of as well was the fact that they were both drunk, because I could smell the alcohol. So I was thinking that maybe because they're drunk, they might do something that they might not really do if they weren't drunk. So that played a pretty big fear as well. Fast forward to the second month, I was in the Donetsk pretrial detention prison, and I was in a solitary confinement cell that was made for 2 people, but we had 4 people in there. And gradually, day by day, like I was doing propaganda 5 times a week. I'd be taken out with a hood on me and put into a stress position and walked to the propaganda room, put in front of a camera, or be given a phone to make propaganda calls to the British government. And then every once in a while, the people that were dealing with this, they would mention that I'll be going to court soon. And I remember eventually it came to the month when the court was like coming. It was obvious from the very beginning that it was a kangaroo court. Like nothing was in our favor. There was no defense for us. We didn't have any time to prepare defense, nor did we get to speak to our lawyers before the court. So we knew that this was pretty much a show for Russia. And after a quick discussion, our lawyer said that you should plead guilty to mercenarism because you'll get a lesser charge, you'll get a lesser sentence when you do the appeal. So at this point, we didn't really have any other option other than to go along with the show. And we all took back our not guilty on the mercenary charge and pled guilty. Then the next day, it was just more general court stuff and bullshit. And then it was on the Thursday, on the final day, when they read us our sentence, that they sentenced us to death, like all of us. And I was listening to what the judge was saying, like with the punishments, and I remember just hearing Smrt Nakaz, which is death sentence. And as soon as I heard that, my entire like body just like went numb. I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't cry if I wanted to. I was pretty much just an empty shell, just going along with this whole show. It's not the death sentence itself. It's the waiting for it to happen, because you don't know what day will be your last day, and every now and then, like, you'll be taken out to go do propaganda, and the guards would like mention to you like, why haven't you been shot yet? Or they would like be sadistic and say, oh, we're taking you to be shot. So you would always end up leaving the cell like not knowing if this is going to be like your like final few minutes alive. So it took a very like negative impact on like my mental health. And I remember like after the sentence, like there wasn't one moment in captivity where I was actually able to cry. And the moment I wanted to cry was when I got back to the cell after the sentence, and I tried so hard to cry, but I was unable to, because I was like, I just didn't know like what's going to happen. Like there was the fear and the intimidation, and I remember just trying to force myself to cry to just get some emotion out, but it was impossible for me at that moment. I remember at this point, I still had like some sort of hope that we might be exchanged. So it wasn't very initial. I remember that like every day we would like be reminded that I'm gonna be getting shot at some point, and you'd hear something on the propaganda radio that they're setting up the stages for us to be executed, and that would get me down negatively. But then I would try to like move my mind away from it, so I'd use like dark humor like with the guys I was with to like just joke about stuff, and we'd find ways to like take our mind away from it. There'd be moments where I'd be just thinking to myself and just trying to like get my mind out of like that place. And eventually I just said to myself, if it happens, it happens. But I think for me the biggest like killer of it was just the waiting of like the unknown. at this point I'd been moved into a cell with a Croatian guy from my battalion, a friend, and we found a razor blade that was hidden in the bars in the window. And I remember like laying down on my bed at night time, like thinking about like just ending it all. And I was very close to just doing it because I was fed up of just sprouting out all this bullshit on camera. And the only reason I didn't do it was because of my friend Prebik, who was in the cell with me. And I was afraid that if I killed myself, like they might punish him because he didn't stop it, even though he was asleep. And thankfully, because of him, I didn't do it. Because 2 weeks later after that was when we were taken out of a cell, and when we were taken out, I thought I was just being taken out to do propaganda. They put the bag on me, and then they called his name, and then I started to like get scared because like they never do that. It's always just been me on my own. And we're being taken. I've memorized the path that I go to the propaganda room. We're going along the same similar path. And I remember we would get to the gatehouse, and I can't see anything. I've got a hood on my head. I've just memorized because I've gone out on this path so many times. We walk past the place where you would turn to go do the propaganda, and I'm like in total fear now because I'm being taken somewhere I've never been taken before. And eventually we go down some steps, and they take the hood off, and I see that we're in some sort of like processing like area. And the guards' attitude changed, like it became a bit more relaxed. They didn't care about us being in a submissive stance. The guard told me to follow him, and I was able to look at him like as a person, like which you were never able to do before. Like if you ever looked at the guard, like they would beat you, and it was really weird, and I wasn't sure what was going on exactly. He took us round and he took his phone out and made us like say like, oh, we've been watered and we've been fed, like we've not been beaten, and then made us sing the Russian anthem again. And then they put me in, and they did the same with my Croatian friend, and they put us into a small cell, and we sat on a bench just waiting to figure out what's going on. And then we heard one of the guards come to the cell next door. He opened the slit up, and I heard him say to the people that were in there, so it's like, you're not going to pick up a weapon again, like you're not going to go back to fight. And then I heard this, and I was whispering to Prebik, like, did you hear that? Like, why would he say that? Like I was whispering it, and Prebik remained silent because I think he was processing like what was going on. And I remember when I heard that, there was that sense of like hope, but at the same time, there was my second voice in my head who was telling me, like, don't believe it, it's a trick, like this is going to be something bad. And then eventually I heard another guard who came in later, who spoke to one of the guards that was just observing, and I heard him say that like what's going on. He then said that there's a obmin, which in English is exchange. Again, I heard that, and I again whispered to Prebik, like, did you hear that? Like, he said exchange. They lined up all the Ukrainians that was in the cell next door to us. There was about 35 of us. They put bags on our head, and then we were instructed that when we are given the command, we're going to walk out single file. I was first, and we went out, and there was a military truck waiting for us. There was a guy in camouflage clothing. He took a photo of myself and then asked for my name, and I was instructed to get to the back of the truck. As soon as I got to the truck, the attitude changed again to aggressive and violence. There was a guy there with duct tape. He duct taped my eyes, and then he duct taped my arms together, and then I was lifted into the back of the truck, thrown into the back, and forced to sit down with my legs spread open. At that point, he kicked me in the nuts, and then he instructed me to hold my hands above my head, and another person would come, sit down, and then I put my hands over him so that we're interlocked. I wasn't really too sure if, like, at this moment, because like we'd gone back to violence, so I thought maybe we were being transferred to another like prison deeper into Russia. Maybe the front lines collapsed or something. And I remember once we got moving, I remember hearing like the other foreigners, like Sean and the others, who were like shouting because of like people stepping on their foot or something. And the guy who was in front of me, I remember whispering to him, like asking like, who is this? And he was like sort of like shouting to a degree like a loud whisper, like telling me who he is, and I realised it was my battalion commander, Major Bovo Evgeny, and I'd last seen him when I was in the Abob prison, and then he was also on my prison block for the past 6 months as well. So I was a bit relieved to see him, and I knew if he's here, like it must be something big. And it wasn't until the next morning that we arrived at an airport, because I could hear the planes and the equipment. And then also during this journey, the duct tape that was around my eyes came loose, so I was able to see through the bottom of it. So every once in a while, I would have a glimpse at like what I can see through the back, and I could see like a built-up, like modernized like area compared to Donetsk, which is primarily a shithole. And eventually we got unloaded and like led into the arrival area of the Rostov airport, where you would normally go into after you get off the plane, and they took the duct tape off, and then I caught my glimpse of the Saudis who were in the traditional like clothing. I was wondering like who it is exactly. We went to sit down on some chairs, and it was me and the 9 other foreigners, and the Saudis came over to us, and one by one they gave us a medical assessment to see if we're fit to fly. I remember they asked if I had any injuries, but I didn't tell them because I was like afraid that maybe they're working for the Russians, so I just lied through that. And it wasn't until a few hours later, when the command was given, that we were taken to an airport terminal bus, and the bus drove us to the plane. And at that moment, the MP that was like guarding us, he said like, when the bus stops, you're going to listen to my instructions, you're going to go to the plane one by one. If anyone does anything that I don't say, you're going to get electrocuted. So we went one by one. We didn't want to get electrocuted, of course. And I remember climbing the steps. I remember when we sat down, there was the sense that like this is happening, but at the same time I was still in like dreadful fear that like something's going to go wrong and we're going to be taken off. So I think it was when we finally took off that some sense of like I'm free like set in. However, I was still in shock. And I remember as we were taking off, I could smell cigarettes being smoked. And I said to the Saudi security guy who was like stood in front of me, I was like, I gestured to him like, do you have a cigarette? And he was like, oh, you want a cigarette? And I was like, yes, please. And I remember as soon as he got his cigarettes out, like all the other foreigners like caught wind and they're like, can I have a cigarette? So we ended up chain smoking on the jet, and I think it was like at that moment we realised that we're going home, but still we were still in like deep shock. And we then learned that there was an onboard like kitchen, because it was a Saudi jet, so they had all sorts of like 5-star like VIP like food. So we ended up like ordering like all sorts of like crazy shit. And then the Saudis came and gave us like new clothes to like change into. I went into I went into the toilet, and there was a mirror, and I remember just like staring at it for like a couple of moments, just like thinking like I'm no longer in that place.